A solemn and emotional day in France as that nation honors the 130 victims of the Paris attacks. This is Outnumbered. I'm Andrea Tantaros, and here with us today, Faulkner, Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor Julie Roginsky, National Review columnist and Fox News contributor Katherine Timpf is here for the first time, and today's hashtag #OneLuckyGuy, senior managing editor of FoxNewsHealth.com and Fox Medical A-Team member Dr. Manny Alvarez. And you are outnumbered on this day when all of us have probably overeaten and could use a little advice from you on what to do about it now.
I love to overeat myself. But everybody had a great Thanksgiving, I hope.
We did.
Yeah, I had a wonderful time yesterday with the family. And, you know, this is a very good time of the year, you know, to remind ourselves how lucky we are and what a great country we live in.
That's Amen. True. Very blessed.
Yes, yeah, amen indeed. To that. And let's get right to the news. 2 weeks to the day after the horrific assault on the City of Lights, French President François Hollande reading the names of the dead at a national ceremony of remembrance and promising families of the victims that he will do everything to destroy what he calls the army of fanatics. This after the French leader met last night in Moscow with Russian President Vladimir Putin, securing an agreement to share intel in the fight against ISIS. Also, possibly stepping up their involvement, Great Britain, as Prime Minister David Cameron makes an urgent appeal to lawmakers in the UK to support airstrikes against ISIS in Syria. In the meantime, syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer saying that ISIS has created a terror training state bigger than anything the world has ever seen on a President Obama's watch. Listen.
We're not asking a lot of the president. We're simply asking for what the French president asked for, a modicum of urgency, a modicum of commitment, and it has never been there. And it isn't there now, and it's not going to happen between now and the day he leaves office.
So, will President Obama listen to that advice, Harris? And is it about showing urgency, or is it about actually doing something and showing it?
Well, I think in terms of this story, because it has been so badly judged by this particular White House over the last year and a half with the JV team comments and so on and so forth, that it is necessary that they do both. I mean, if you're going to show urgency, and also do urgency, I think the two go hand in hand. I will say, though, it was kind of interesting. So French President Hollande met both with Putin this week and President Obama. So he's been making the rounds. He's trying to start that new coalition because we, according to President Obama, already have 65 countries, but not quite doing maybe what needed to be done. So Hollande is making the rounds. Our response, very similar to Russia's. And if you look at some of the commentary that has been made about just looking at the body language and so on and so forth with President Putin and Hollande, not a lot of eye contact made in those bilaterals. This is a difficult spot for everybody. The thing that's happened now, and I say the toxic thing that's happened now between Turkey and Russia with that fighter jet being shot down, has clouded everything. So France just simply got support, but not that new coalition.
Dr. Manny, Vladimir Putin saying he is willing to work with the coalition defeating ISIS. Putin has been ahead of this. I mean, say what you want about it, but he's been active in Syria. He does identify ISIS as an enemy, and some of the United States are saying, why doesn't the United States join up and piggyback on that?
You know, I'm a little older than you, all of you, and I remember the time, or, you know, in American history, the leadership of America was always there. You know, every time there was a world crisis, it was the U.S. president, the U.S. government who created the agenda, brought everybody to the table, and we had big issues throughout the history of this country. If you look at what's going on today, you have all these presidents flying to different cities, trying to come up with some sort of agenda. Our president is, you know, null and void. He's nowhere to be found. You know, you had 130 people that died a couple of weeks ago. He should have been there. He should have been in Paris, showing the American leadership, understanding the problem. But right now, nobody's in charge of anything, and you see the chaos that this is creating around the world.
Well, Julie, it seems like the Russians have stepped up into this region. They've elevated their presence there. And it looks like the French president is willing to take that help. Should the United States, even if President Obama doesn't want to put boots on the ground, should he join in a more realistic way besides lip service and words like, oh, we're going to coordinate?
Well, look, we're bombing, and certainly I think we could do more on that front. The problem is there's always a price to be paid if we join with the Russians, which means that we have to forego getting rid of Assad. We have to forego any sanctions with respect to the Ukrainian crisis, which continues to be a very real crisis. We have to forego the fact that our NATO ally, Turkey, just shot down a Russian plane. The Russians claim it was in Syrian territory. The Turks claim it was in their territory. And if you see what Putin did, he, of course, blamed it on the United States. This brings me back to the good old days of the Cold War.
Like we would have orchestrated that as the
Yeah. I mean, this brings me back to the halcyon days of the Cold War, when anything happened in the world, it was automatically America's fault. When it came to the Soviets, Putin's having that playbook again. So there's a price to be paid. We could join with the Russians. But that means everything I just mentioned has to be back off the table. And I'm not sure that as a foreign policy.
I'm wondering, I mean, Kerry is, Kat, working on some sort of solution in Syria, which if Assad goes, it's likely that whoever fills the place will be his evil twin number two and will be ideologically aligned with him. About this Turkish airplane, it's a pretty sticky situation, and I think President Obama knows that, because they're a member of NATO. But over the weekend, or I should say over the holiday, which felt like a weekend, there were reports that United States shared that flight path and that plane was in Syrian airspace, that the Turks had no right to shoot that plane down. But because of NATO, we now are obliged to get involved. I mean, I think Turkey should be thrown out of NATO. What do you think?
I think that even if we are obliged to get involved, and we won't, and Obama wants to make it clear that we won't, and I think he's trying to minimize what he even is doing in terms of airstrikes and all those kinds of things, because he came in here saying he was going to be an anti-war president, he was going to be a peaceful president, and no matter what happens, I just kind of picture him with his fingers in his ears being like, la, 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 we're good, we're fine, it's fine, don't worry about it, because he wants his legacy to be what he expected it to be.
So he is more worried about doing something to upset his base, which will hurt his legacy, than actually potentially doing the right thing, which is scary, because I do think the American public sees this as a reaction based on politics and ideology, not one based in reality.
That I think Americans also see is that there's just not a clear road ahead. And so they might be able to get behind anything if they just knew what it was. We started this conversation, though, with the people of France, and our hearts go out to them after what happened. We've seen a lot of terror. I mean, look at what just happened in Tunisia. The world is watching as these savages march their way across. A new chapter in the controversy over refugees fleeing the war in Syria. We've learned the Obama administration has just sent a letter to state agencies warning they do not have the legal right to refuse to take refugees and threatening penalties for those who refuse to. Right now, governors in 18 states, you may know, are saying that they will not take those people in, and the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee is now lashing back in a statement saying, quote, the American people are rightly concerned about admitting Syrian refugees and the impact it could have on the safety of their families and neighbors. It's hypocritical for the Obama administration officials to threaten enforcement action against these states when they refuse to enforce the vast majority of our immigration laws, end quote. And then there's this development. In his Thanksgiving address, the president compared the Syrian refugees to the pilgrims who came to America centuries ago. Watch.
I've been touched by the generosity of the Americans who've written me letters and emails in recent weeks, offering to open their homes to refugees fleeing the brutality of ISIL. Nearly 4 centuries after the Mayflower set sail, the world is still full of pilgrims, men and women who want nothing more than the chance for a safer, better future for themselves and their families. What makes America America is that we offer that chance.
Okay. You know, Doctor, it's interesting. You have shared your family's legacy, their journey here to America. So I'm really curious to get your take.
Look, I'm a refugee. I get the whole concept. And, of course, America is the land that promises the freedom and the beauty to carry your life in a very positive way. However, I know the strategies of refugees when it comes to mass exodus. If you remember, when Fidel Castro opened the Mariel port, the first thing that the Cuban government did back then was to empty all the jails. And they mixed the population that was trying to go back to the U.S. with family members here, and he filled them with rapists, thieves, murderers, and this is a fact. And that's a small-scale exodus at the time. It lasted, you know, several months, a couple of 100,000 people, whatever. This is millions of people now coming out of the Middle East, uncontrolled, with no papers, with anything.
Well, they're fleeing war.
And I'm sure the tactic, if it was, you know, if Fidel Castro thought about it, I'm sure the leaders of ISIS have figured this out. You know, infiltrate people in that group, and eventually will call upon you to do harm. And we have to be careful. Right now, we have to be very careful.
I want to ask this question, though.
Yeah.
You were a beneficiary of that onslaught of people coming to this country. So would you say close the doors? Like, what's the answer? I mean, you know,
I don't know what
the inside out.
We have no answer right now because everything is out of control. When you have a president with no foreign policy, when you have things that have no measurable, you know, things that you can checks and balances, you have to take a pause. You have to stop for a minute and say, wait a minute, this is not the time. This is not the time to take the refugees without better procedures, and we don't have those procedures right now.
Forget it an issue of timing. We cannot properly vet them.
Right.
These emotional arguments mean nothing. There is no way to vet them. They do not have papers. They will infiltrate. That is exactly what they did in France. And as Hollande says, they should be kept near the country of their origin. How do we vet them, Harris? Do we call up the police chief in Raqqa and say, hey, do you know Mohammed? Do you have any intelligence on him?
Not only that,
there's no proper way to do it. This president cannot even get rid of illegal criminals in this country that are killing Americans. And so I'm sick of the emotional arguments, and for the president to do it on Thanksgiving and compare them to the pilgrims was pretty
That confused me, because I thought the left is always trying to tell us that pilgrims are bad and they brought over all the smallpox and killed everybody.
And hurt the Indians, right, all these different things.
Isn't that supposed to be an insult? I'm just confused. I don't know what I'm supposed to believe about pilgrims anymore.
Well, I will say this, and both of us actually are refugees fleeing communist regimes. Dr. Manny, you wouldn't want the borders shut on you when you came here, no more than I would have, simply because there was a few communist infiltrators, or in your case, rapists or murderers coming over. Look, here's the reality. There are at least 13 checkpoints that we go through, that the United Nations goes through, that our government goes through, that there are multi-agency background checks that this government goes through.
What background, Julie?
Well,
there is no background check. That's a farce and a lie and a bunch of bull.
It's not a farce and a lie.
Yes, it is.
I don't know it.
Okay, what information do they have? There's no database.
Wait a second. You're telling me that you have people like Governor. Okay, you're telling me that people like Governor Chris Christie, who said he would turn away 3-year-old orphans, those people are terrorists? People like that are terrorists?
Okay,
Give me a break.
We'll take the young children.
We will. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that.
Right to that emotional argument.
It's not an emotional argument.
Argue on logic, Julie. No liberal can.
I can argue. Andrea, excuse me. I can absolutely argue on logic, and the logic is this.
And you know what?
The logic is the vast. Are you going to let me finish?
They become
the vast majority of these people.
You agree with me on that?
I don't agree with you. Well, let me finish my thought, which is that France is a very different story. France has open borders. Nobody's streaming over the borders here. It takes 18 to 24 months for somebody to set foot in this country when they're leaving a refugee camp in Jordan or a refugee camp in Turkey. These are not people coming from Raqqa with suicide bombs strapped to their vests the way they are in France. You know that, and we all do.
No, I'm talking about the radicalization of the younger ones.
With regard to the children, we just took, 90,000 of them. They were coming across our southern border from Central America and other places, too. And so we've seen what that can look like. It's very complicated to take them without their parents, whether it's their decision or not. The other thing is this vetting process. I mean, it's ridiculous.
What's ridiculous about it?
Close to 100 forms that need to still be made digital. We can't even process the people that are in this country right now. So, I mean, it is complicated.
There is no vetting process.
But I hear you.
That's what's so ridiculous.
Manny, and I know the country that we live in. So, I mean, we wouldn't be the same without either of you and all the others.
And the fact they want to shut the door on some of these desperate people who are fleeing rape and fleeing
it's a different kind of migration.
Not all immigrants are created equal.
A lot of passion around this issue, a lot of beautiful people to get through as well. So we'll move on and we'll let the news make the news.